Before I tell you this story, I need you to really picture this. A man is sitting alone on a plastic chair in a bus station. It's 5 in the morning, no one is around. His nice suit, the kind that costs more than most people make in a month, is covered in dried blood. His ribs are cracked, he hasn't eaten in 3 days, he has no phone, no wallet, no ID, not one single person left in the world who would pick up the phone if he called. This man, his name is Marcus Cole, used to run half the criminal underworld of Chicago. But 4 days ago, his best friend, the guy he pulled off the streets and raised like a brother, set him up, beat him almost to death, threw him out of his own empire like a stray dog, and now Marcus Cole is sitting on a plastic chair in a bus station, waiting for nothing because he has nothing left to wait for. Then something happens. A tiny hand touches his bruised knuckles, and he flinches, hard, like someone just pressed a gun to his back, because in his world, every touch meant pain. He looks down, and standing right there in front of him is a little girl, 4 years old, wild brown curls, big brown eyes, wearing an oversized red coat, way too big for her tiny body, holding a one-armed teddy bear under her arm. She wasn't scared of the dried blood on his face. She wasn't scared of his scars. She wasn't scared of the cold, dark look in his eyes. She just tilted her little head and whispered, "Mister, are you hurt?" And before he could even answer, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a little crumpled bag of cheap butter cookies from the dollar store. Only 3 left. She placed one cookie very carefully on his knee. "My mama says, when you're sad, you eat something sweet, and it gets better." This man, Marcus Cole, a man who had ordered people hurt without even blinking, a man who had built a criminal empire with nothing but blood and iron. He looked down at that cookie in his trembling hand, and he broke, not quiet little tears, not the dignified kind that look okay in public. He sobbed, like a man who had been holding a scream inside his chest for 36 years, and finally, in front of a child who didn't even know what a mafia boss was, he let it all out. Right there on that plastic chair, in that bus station. And that is where this story really begins. A few minutes later, her mother showed up. Her name was Lena Holloway, 27 years old, thin. Dark circles carved deep under her eyes, wearing a worn white t-shirt and jeans with holes at both knees. Carrying everything she and her daughter owned in one old fabric suitcase and one black plastic bag. She was a widow, a mom who had sold her own blood, literally, to buy her daughter milk. A woman who hadn't eaten a full meal in 2 days so her little girl wouldn't go hungry. But instead of grabbing her child and running from the bleeding stranger on the bench, she sat down, kept a respectful distance, and asked, "Do you need help?" 6 letters, 3 words, spoken by a woman who had absolutely nothing. To a man who had just lost everything, that question changed the rest of both their lives. Marcus shook his head. A small motion, but clear enough to say, "No, I don't need anything from you." He still had just enough pride left to refuse. But Lena didn't leave. She looked at the dried blood along his temple. She watched how he pressed one hand against his left side every time he breathed. And she knew those weren't wounds that pride could heal. She didn't say another word. She just opened her bag, pulled out a half-used plastic bottle of water, and 2 Advil wrapped in a neatly folded paper napkin. She set them on the seat between them, not handing them to him, not pushing, just leaving them there. Like she had placed them by accident, Marcus stared at the bottle and the pills for a long moment. In his world, nothing was ever free. Every gift was a trap, every kindness had a price hiding behind it. But 4 days of thirst was stronger than a lifetime of suspicion. He picked up the bottle, twisted the cap, and drank. Cool water moved down his cracked, dry throat like rain soaking into dry ground. He swallowed the Advil, closed his eyes, and for the first time in 4 days, someone had given him something without wanting anything back. The little girl, her name was Zoe, sat between the 2 of them on the bench, her teddy bear carefully arranged on her lap. She straightened its one good arm and said in the most serious little voice, "Mr. Button, sit nicely. We're waiting for the bus." Lena looked out at the parking lot beyond the terminal doors. Her eyes settled somewhere far away, and then she began to talk, not because Marcus asked, but because sometimes two strangers sharing a bus station bench at 5 in the morning need to fill the silence with truth. Her voice was calm, like someone reading a grocery list. Her husband's name was Travis, a construction worker. 2.5 years ago, he was working on a building site in the West Loop of Chicago. The scaffolding on the 7th floor collapsed. He fell, he died on the spot. Zoe was 18 months old at the time. Lena said those words, "died on the spot," without her voice shaking, without pausing, like she had repeated them so many times they had lost their power to destroy her. She filed a lawsuit against the construction company because the scaffolding didn't meet safety standards. But they hired a huge downtown law firm, the kind with entire floors of offices overlooking the Chicago River, and they buried her case in delay after delay until she ran out of money for legal fees. The safety investigators opened a case, but in the end, the company paid a small fine. The file was closed. Nobody was held responsible. Nobody had to look a 25-year-old widow in the eye and say they were sorry. After that, everything fell apart fast. She lost her job because she had nobody to watch Zoe. She fell 3 months behind on rent. She got an eviction notice. She had no money and no strength left to fight a court. So she left, packed everything she and her daughter owned into a suitcase and a plastic bag, and walked away. Now she was on her way to a small town called Millfield, about an hour south of Chicago, where an old friend of Travis, a man named Floyd, had offered her a small room behind his auto repair shop. Lena told all of this calmly, without crying, without asking for sympathy, without waiting for a reaction. Like she was telling a story about someone else, someone she knew very well, but was not her. Marcus listened, and something twisted inside his chest, not pity, shame. Shame that for 4 days he had been lying on a bus station bench feeling sorry for himself. While this woman had lost her husband, lost her home, lost almost everything, and still stood upright, still carried Advil in her purse in case a stranger needed it, still let her daughter share cookies with a bleeding man on a bench. Lena turned and looked at him, brown eyes just like Zoe's, but carrying far more years than 27 should hold. "And you," she asked, "do you have somewhere to go?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by the loudspeaker announcing the 6:15 bus to Joliet, and Zoe whispering to Mr. Button about something very important. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "No," he said. "No one, nowhere." Each word dropped from his mouth like a heavy brick. It was the first time in his entire life that Marcus Cole admitted to another person that he had absolutely nothing left. Lena nodded slowly. No pity. No, that's so sad. No, it'll be okay. Just a nod, like she understood that sometimes people don't need comfort. They just need someone willing to sit beside them in silence without judging them. Then Zoe looked up. She pointed at her teddy bear's left arm, which was hanging loose at the seam, stuffing spilling out like the inside of a torn pillow. "Mister, can you fix Mr. Button's arm?" Marcus looked at the bear. It was very old, the fabric worn and faded. One plastic eye clouded over, the little bow at its neck stripped of color, until it was just a wrinkled strip of cloth. But the way Zoe held it, the way she looked at it, made it perfectly clear. This bear was the most precious thing in her world. He picked up the bear. His thumb ran over the split seam where the stuffing was pushing out, and suddenly, like someone flipping a switch in his head, he wasn't in the bus station anymore. He was 14 years old, standing in his grandfather Angelo's wood shop in Brooklyn, the smell of sawdust in his hair, small hands learning to hold a chisel at the right angle. His grandfather, a carpenter who had come to America from Italy, had taught him everything in that little workshop: how to shape wood, how to fit chair joints tight without nails, and how to sew, leather, curtains, anything that tore, because his grandfather believed that throwing things away was a sin, and fixing them was what made a man. Marcus learned in that shop from the time he was 14 until he was 18. 4 years where his hands knew only wood, leather, fabric, and the sharp, sweet smell of pine glue. Then his grandfather died, right at the saw table one November afternoon. Collapsed into the sawdust with the plane still in his hand. The bank took the workshop, some debt Marcus never even knew about. At 18, with no family, no home, and no skill anyone would pay enough for, Marcus stepped out onto the streets of Brooklyn. And the streets swallowed him whole. Hands that once shaped wood began to hold guns. Hands that once stitched leather began to count dirty money. And before long, he forgot they had ever known how to do anything except destroy. He blinked. He was back in the bus station. Mr. Button still in his hands, Zoe still watching him with patient brown eyes, believing the way only a 4-year-old can believe that adults can fix anything. Marcus looked around. A few steps away, on the floor near the leg of a bench, was a small safety pin. He bent slowly, a pain tearing through his broken ribs, and picked it up. Then he looked at the torn hem of his ruined jacket and carefully pulled out a long black thread. He bent the safety pin into the shape of a tiny needle, threaded the black strand through. His hands were bruised and swollen. His right index finger was bent crooked from the beating 4 days ago. Every time the makeshift needle went through the fabric, a sharp pain shot up to his elbow, but he sewed slowly, carefully, each stitch evenly spaced, the seam straight as if drawn with a ruler. The muscles in his fingers remembered, even though his mind had spent nearly 20 years trying to forget. He pushed the stuffing back inside, pulled the fabric edges together, made the final stitch, cut the thread with his teeth, tucked the knot neatly inside. Mr. Button's arm was whole again, not new, but solid, and it wouldn't come apart again. All done, little one. Zoe snatched the bear and squeezed it tight, her eyes shining. "You're a wizard," she cried, holding Mr. Button up for her mom to see. "Mommy, look. Mr. Button's arm isn't torn anymore." Lena looked at the repaired arm, then at Marcus's hands, at the neat little row of stitches made with thread pulled from a ruined jacket and a safety pin off a dirty floor. "You're very good with your hands," she said softly. Something in her voice had shifted, a little less guarded. "I was going to throw it away a few times," she said quietly, "but she wouldn't let me. Her father bought it for her, before he died." She said that last part almost to herself. And Marcus heard the weight in it. The construction worker who fell from the 7th floor. The 18-month-old baby girl holding the teddy bear her father bought, never knowing he was already gone. Marcus looked down at his hands, bruised, swollen, scarred, ugly, and yet they had just put back together the arm of a war, not teddy bear. The most precious thing in the world to a 4-year-old girl. For the first time in almost 20 years, those hands had made something. Instead of destroying something, and he felt it, very small, very faint, but real, like a thin line of light slipping through the crack of a door, in a room he had kept locked and dark his entire life. The loudspeaker crackled. The 6:30 bus to Millfield was leaving in 15 minutes. Lena stood up, grabbed the old suitcase with one hand, the black plastic bag with the other, shoulders sagging under the weight, but her back still straight. Zoe climbed down from the bench, one arm hugging Mr. Button, the other clutching the hem of her mother's skirt. They had only taken a few steps when Lena stopped. She turned back, looked at Marcus still sitting on the bench. Back against the wall, hands on his thighs, looking like a man waiting to disappear, she stood there, her lips moving, weighing every word. Then she said, "Millfield isn't heaven. It's really not even close. But if you have nowhere to go, you can come with us. I'll ask Floyd if there might be a place for you to stay for a while." Marcus looked at her. Inside him, every survival instinct screamed, refuse. A Chicago crime boss doesn't ride a bus with a broke single mom. The last scraps of his pride would die if he said yes. He opened his mouth to say no, but then Zoe let go of her mother's skirt, turned around and ran back to him on the little stumbling steps of a 4-year-old in sneakers too big for her feet. She wrapped her whole small hand around 2 of his fingers. Her hand was warm, soft, closing around his bruised, swollen finger gently, like she was afraid of hurting him. "Come with us, mister," she said. "Mr. Button wants you to come too." She held the bear up to his face as proof. Marcus looked into the clouded plastic eyes of Mr. Button. At the bear's arm he had just stitched back together with thread from a torn jacket. Then down at the small, warm hand holding two of his fingers, and the refusal he had ready dissolved. Like it had never existed, he stood up. Pain tore through his side as he straightened, but he tightened his jaw, and followed the mother and the little girl toward the gate. Lena didn't say anything else, didn't ask if he was sure, didn't thank him, just gave a small nod, and turned to walk ahead, the old suitcase rattling over cracked concrete. On the Greyhound bus, Marcus sat by the window, Zoe sat in the middle, Lena on the aisle. The seats smelled like mildew and cheap cleaning spray. The air conditioning barely worked. The ceiling fans rattled. The bus pulled away. It rolled past the industrial edges of Chicago, past abandoned steel plants with every window smashed out, past rusted iron fences and scorched lawns, past peeling billboards advertising land nobody wanted. Marcus stared out the window and watched the city he had once owned grow smaller behind him. Like it was leaving him, on purpose. Zoe couldn't sit still for long. She began telling Marcus everything. In the non-stop chatter of a 4-year-old who has just found a new adult willing to listen, she told him Mr. Button liked strawberry ice cream, but hated chocolate. She told him about the neighbor's yellow cat named Pickles, who used to climb through the window and sleep on her pillow. She told him her favorite color was red, because it's the color of fire trucks, and she wanted to grow up to be a firefighter and save people. Marcus didn't say much, just nodded, said a soft hum here and there, but he listened, really listened. And every time he nodded, Zoe smiled bigger, like his attention was the greatest prize she had ever won. About an hour in, her voice began to slow. The story about Pickles blurred into a long yawn. Her head tipped further, and came to rest fully against Marcus's thigh. He froze, his entire body locked up like someone had pressed a cold gun to the back of his head. No child had ever fallen asleep on him, not once in his whole life, not in his world. His world had no children. No trust like this. No small, warm head resting on his leg like it was the safest place on earth. He didn't know where to put his hands. He was afraid to even move. His arms just hovered at his sides like a man surrendering. Lena noticed. She leaned over to gently pull Zoe back to her side, but Marcus shook his head slightly. "It's fine," he whispered. "Let her sleep." Lena looked at his face, something in it she hadn't seen before. Then she nodded and sat back. Marcus lowered his arms slowly. His left hand rested on the edge of the seat. His right hand hesitated, then settled very lightly on Zoe's back. So lightly, it almost didn't even touch, but just enough to feel the steady rise and fall of her breathing. The warmth from the crown of her head seeped through the blood-stained fabric of his jacket, into his skin, and it was a strange warmth, unlike anything he had ever felt before. Not the warmth of alcohol, not the warmth of money, not the fake warmth of people who told him what he wanted to hear because they feared him. Just the real, simple warmth of a child who trusted him enough to fall asleep on his leg, even though his face was covered in scars and his eyes were full of darkness. He had no words for that feeling. Lena looked out the window, tired but awake, her left hand resting lightly on Zoe's back near Marcus's right hand. Not touching, just inches apart, over the sleeping child. The bus rolled past withered cornfields. Early sunlight came slanting through the dusty glass, laying a pale gold over 3 strangers, 3 people on a cheap bus, each carrying their own private ruins they hadn't dared to share. But in that moment, with a sleeping child between them and a worn teddy bear clutched in small arms, something like quiet peace sat with them on that ride. A kind of peace both Marcus and Lena had forgotten the feel of for a very long time. The bus pulled into Millfield just before 11 in the morning. The stop wasn't really a station, just a sheet metal roof on 4 iron posts by the roadside, a chipped green wooden bench, and overflowing trash can nobody ever emptied. Zoe woke when the brakes hissed, rubbed her eyes, looked out the window. Then turned to Marcus and asked if they were there. He nodded, even though he had absolutely no idea where he had arrived. The three of them stepped off the bus into the hot, thick June air of Illinois, and Marcus saw Millfield for the first time. Main Street ran straight from the bus stop to the far end of town, lined with small one-story storefronts. More than half of them empty, white paper taped to dark windows, boards nailed over glass, a pawn shop with a flickering open sign. A Dollar General in the corner, the only place with cars out front, an old white church at the end of the street, paint peeling, leaning like a tired old man trying to stay on his feet. Most of the houses were worn down. Rusted fences, yellow lawns, a few abandoned homes with boarded windows. But someone was watering plants on a porch. An old woman in a porch swing waved as they walked past. Two kids rode bikes along the cracked sidewalk. Millfield was poor, but it was alive, and it still knew how to say hello. Floyd was waiting at the stop, leaning against an old silver Chevy pickup, arms crossed, big, broad, shouldered, hands thick and calloused with grease, wearing a gray T-shirt and brown work pants, quiet in the way of a man who doesn't talk much, not because he has nothing to say, but because he doesn't need to. He was Travis's old friend from the construction days, had moved back to Millfield to open a repair shop, stayed in touch with Lena after Travis died. When Floyd saw Lena and Zoe step off the bus, the stiffness in his face eased. Then he saw Marcus step down behind them. He looked Marcus over, slowly, carefully, took in the dried blood on the suit, the bruised face, the cold steel eyes, even at their weakest. Suspicion lit Floyd's face like a neon sign. His jaw tightened, his shoulders turned slightly toward Lena, protective instinct. But Lena met his gaze with a look that said, "I know what I'm doing." Floyd respected her enough not to ask questions in front of Marcus. He only nodded shortly and said there was a shed behind the shop. A place to sleep could be cleared, no greeting, no handshake, no asking his name. Marcus understood. He had lived his whole life in a world where trust had to be earned, not given, and he didn't blame Floyd one bit. Lena and Zoe stayed in the small room behind the garage, no bigger than a walk-in closet from Marcus's old penthouse, just enough for a single bed and a plastic wardrobe, but clean, with a window looking out onto the yard. Marcus stayed in the shed, 10 steps away, 4 corrugated metal walls, a concrete floor, a fold-up army cot Floyd dragged out from the corner. No pillow, 1 thin blanket. The first night, he lay on that cot, listening to crickets and a distant train, staring up at the rusted metal ceiling, his body aching in every single joint. But for the first time in days, his stomach wasn't empty, because Lena had brought him a plate of spaghetti with canned tomato sauce before dark. The next day, Lena walked Marcus around the neighborhood, Zoe running ahead, clutching Mr. Button. She showed him Miss Me's house on the corner, the laundromat with the broken dryers, the post office, not much bigger than a living room. Then they stopped in front of an empty lot, about half an acre wide. It used to be the parking lot of a canning factory that had closed more than 10 years ago. Now it was just an unofficial dump. Plastic bottles, beer cans, old tires, used needles tangled in weeds, broken concrete walls covered in spray paint, a smell of damp rot rising in the heat. The whole neighborhood was scared of this place. At night, it became a gathering spot for addicts and petty criminals. Parents told their kids never to go near it. The community had always wanted to clean it up, build a playground. Something for the neighborhood, but nobody had the know-how, nobody had the money. And every time someone asked the county for help, they got an automated email saying the request had been recorded. And then endless silence after that. Zoe tugged Marcus's hand, pointed at the lot, looked up with her big brown eyes. If there was a house there, would I have somewhere to play? Marcus didn't answer right away. He stood at the edge of the lot, his eyes sweeping every corner, and his mind did what it had always done best. He didn't see trash. He saw flat ground, soil packed firm from years as a parking lot, barely any grading needed, enough space for 4 or 5 small houses if laid out right. Easy road access for materials, water and power lines already running along the eastern sidewalk. The mind that had built a criminal empire from nothing turned on. Like a machine that hadn't been used in a long time, but still worked perfectly. That evening, Lena made spaghetti with canned sauce again. The pasta a little too soft, she'd left the heat too high, but it was hot, and Marcus cleaned his plate. The 3 of them sat on the concrete steps behind the garage, Zoe placing Mr. Button beside her plate, pretending to feed him with a tiny fork, the sky darkening slowly, a single street light at the end of the alley casting yellow light across the steps. Then Zoe set down her fork, looked at Marcus with a seriousness you wouldn't expect from a 4. "You're old." "Do you know how to build houses?" Marcus said yes. "Can you build one for me and my mom?" She asked it the way a child asks for another cookie. With no idea how heavy those words were, we've never had a house. Marcus had built hundreds of buildings in his life. $1,000,000 penthouses overlooking Lake Michigan, glass office towers in the Loop, commercial complexes where a single square foot cost more than a year of Travis's wages. But not once, not one single time in his life, had he built a home for someone who truly needed a roof. He looked at Zoe, then he looked up at Lena, standing in the doorway, the yellow light behind her casting her thin shadow onto the concrete. Her hand gripping the doorframe like she needed it to hold herself up. Her eyes moving from her daughter to Marcus, then down to the ground, because she knew what Zoe had just asked. She knew it was the question she herself had never dared say out loud. Marcus looked into Zoe's eyes, and he spoke, low and steady, no trembling. "I promise," he said. "I'll build you a house." Lena opened her mouth. He could see she wanted to say something. Maybe don't make empty promises to my child. Maybe, what do you even know about us? Maybe too many people had promised things and then disappeared. But she looked into his eyes and she went quiet. Because what she saw wasn't pity. It wasn't the kindness of someone trying to feel good about themselves for a moment. It was something she had never seen in anyone before. The absolute cold, ruthless determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. Except the words he had just spoken. At 5 o'clock the next morning, while the sky was still dark gray and fog hung low over the roads of Millfield, Marcus was already standing at the edge of that vacant lot. He hadn't slept much on the army cot. His ribs ached every time he shifted, but the promise he had made to Zoe the night before burned in his chest. Like a live ember that absolutely refused to die, he knocked on Floyd's shop door. Floyd was making coffee. Marcus asked to borrow a pair of rubber gloves and a plastic bin. Floyd looked at him, said nothing, took the thick yellow gloves off the wall hook, handed them over, dragged out a 20-gallon bin from the corner. Still no questions, still no trust, but no interference either. Marcus pulled on the gloves, grabbed the bin, and walked out to the lot alone. He started from the eastern corner closest to the sidewalk, picking up plastic bottles, beer cans, moldy fast food containers, bags tangled in weeds. He gathered the used needles separately into the bin, careful with each one, turning the tips downward. Broken bricks he stacked into a pile at one corner, old tires stacked together, scrap metal gathered into one pile. The careful, precise instinct of a man who once ran a multi-million-dollar empire now applied to picking up trash on an abandoned lot. He worked alone for the first 2 hours, sweat soaking through the old tape Floyd had lent him, dull ache in his ribs every time he bent down. But he clenched his teeth and kept going, the way he had endured everything in his life. Millfield started waking up. Curtains cracked open, curious eyes peering out. A scarred stranger was cleaning the lot the whole town had given up on for more than 10 years. Alone at 7 in the morning, like a madman, the first person to step outside was a young man named Danny. 24 years old, brown skinned, hair cut short in a military style, broad-shouldered, but with eyes that were always restless, like he was hearing gunfire that nobody else could hear. Danny was an Afghanistan veteran, 2 tours, home with PTSD and nightmares he couldn't shake, plus a small record from his teens, stole a car at 16. Enough to make every employer in the county shake their head when they ran his background check, even though his construction and mechanical skills were better than anyone else in town. Danny didn't say anything, didn't ask anything, didn't greet him. He went into Floyd's shed, grabbed a shovel, walked out to the lot, stood beside Marcus, and started digging. 2 strangers, side by side, in silence. The only sounds, the shovel hitting earth and bottles clattering into the bin. Around 9 o'clock, Miss Me from the corner house came out. 70 years old, stooped back, carrying a pitcher of homemade lemonade and a few plastic cups. She set them down at the edge of the lot, poured 2 cups, didn't say much, just nodded, then sat on a folding chair and watched the men work. Then Ray from across the street brought an old hoe. Then 3 young guys who usually just hung around outside the pawn shop showed up to help. At first, out of curiosity, later, out of shame, because they couldn't just stand there watching a scarred stranger and a veteran work themselves raw while they did nothing. By noon, there were 8 people on the lot. By afternoon, 12, and Marcus, the same mind that had built an underground empire from nothing, shifted into the mode he knew best. He divided people into groups, younger men for heavy lifting, older residents sorting materials, Danny assigned to tools. His hands were the most skilled. His instructions were clear and short, his voice low but firm, each sentence carrying an authority that made people follow without question. He surveyed the abandoned houses around town for usable material, good beams, intact windows, copper piping. Insulation panels, he called a scrapyard 15 miles south, negotiated a load of discarded lumber and metal for almost nothing, just transport costs. He drove Floyd's pickup to the nearest Home Depot in Joliet, not to buy, but to talk to the manager. With the same cold, precise words he once used in $1,000,000 deals, he persuaded the man to hand over an entire batch of goods they were about to dump. Slightly warped boards, cement bags torn on the outside, boxes of nails with water, damaged labels. The Home Depot manager studied him, studied the handwritten list on a piece of cardboard, then nodded. Because it's hard to say no to a man who talks to the world like it owes him something, even when his face is still healing from a beating. That evening, Marcus sat in the shed under a single bare bulb, sketching designs on cardboard cut from shipping boxes. Using a stubby purple pencil that Zoe had lent him, the kind with a little princess on the end, he calculated foundation sizes. Wooden frame structures, minimum material costs for a small 2-bedroom house, a community-built model. Everyone contributing what they had, strength contributing strength, skill contributing skill, those with nothing contributing time. During the days he worked beside everyone on the lot, and he saw something he had never once seen in the underworld. People working, not out of fear, not for money, but because they wanted to, because they believed. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had come and said, "This pile of trash and broken concrete can become something else." And they chose to believe it. At night, lying on the cot in the shed, staring up at the rusted ceiling, the old part of him stayed awake. Still growling, he thought of the penthouse on the 42nd floor, of his stolen empire, of his former friend sitting in his chair, giving orders with power Marcus had built. Anger burned low in his gut every night, cold and patient, the kind that doesn't flare and fade but waits. Like embers under ash. But every morning when he stepped out of that shed and saw Zoe sitting on the garage steps with Mr. Button on her lap, waving and calling out that it was morning and time to build a house, the anger retreated one step. And something else advanced, something he still didn't dare name, claiming just a little more space inside his chest. Lena didn't ask questions. That was the first thing Marcus noticed about her in the days that followed. She didn't ask who he was, where he came from, why his face was full of scars that weren't from any construction accident. She didn't ask why his hands could stitch a teddy bear with a safety pin, and also make 12 strangers obey him without needing to raise his voice. She only watched. Every morning she opened the door of the room behind the garage. Marcus was already out on the lot, his silhouette moving through the early fog. Every evening after Zoe fell asleep, she heard the sound of wood being cut from the shed. He kept his word. That was all she needed to know for now. On the 4th day, Lena brought Marcus a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Cheap white bread, peanut butter, and grape jelly. The kind every American kid grows up eating. She set it on a plank beside where he was sawing, added a bottle of homemade lemonade, turned away without a word. Marcus looked at the sandwich. He wanted to refuse. She was counting slices of bread. He would be taking from her share, but hunger is stronger than pride, and he picked it up and ate. The next day she brought another. The day after that, another still. By the 3rd day he stopped refusing, and she began to stay. At noon they sat on stacked pallets at the site, Marcus eating his sandwich, Lena sipping lemonade, Zoe running around nearby with Danny, who turned out to be unexpectedly good with kids. Maybe because children didn't ask him about Afghanistan, or his record, or why he woke up screaming some nights. They talked a little, mostly about the build, the weather, what Zoe had eaten that day, safe things that didn't touch anyone's wounds. Most of the time they were just quiet, and it was a strange kind of quiet Marcus had never known, a comfortable quiet. That didn't need to be filled with words. That didn't require explanations for why no one was talking. In his old world, silence was a weapon, a threat, the space before someone drew a gun. With Lena, silence was just silence, and it was so easy he didn't know what to do with it. In the evenings, after everyone went home, Marcus sat outside the shed, carving window frames from reclaimed wood with a utility knife, the yellow light from the single bulb over the repair shop awning, the soft sound of wood being slowly shaped, repeated quietly in the warm summer night. After putting Zoe to bed, Lena would step outside, sit on the concrete steps, about 10 paces away, close enough to talk, far enough to keep a boundary. She listened to the sound of carving for a while, then she said, quietly and without judgment, "You're not a normal man." Marcus didn't look up. His hands kept moving. No, normal men don't command a crowd with just their voice. Normal men don't have eyes like yours. He stopped carving, looked down at the wood. "I used to be a very bad man." "Used to?" she asked. Silence, crickets in the grass. The wood no longer whispering because his hands had gone still. Marcus looked at the knife, at the piece of wood slowly becoming a window frame. And he spoke slowly, almost like he was asking himself the same question. "I don't know what I am now." Lena didn't add anything. She didn't say he was a good man. She didn't say anyone could change. She didn't offer any of the hollow comfort people reach for to feel useful. She just let the silence stay between them on those steps, and that silence wasn't heavy. It was strangely easy to breathe. Easier than any answer could have been. Then she stood, said good night, and went inside, leaving behind a faint trace of lavender in the air. From the cheap body lotion she rubbed on her hands every night after washing the dishes. Marcus stayed where he was, kept carving, but his hands were no longer steady. He began to notice things he didn't want to notice. He noticed that every noon at the site, he listened for the sound of her footsteps, the way his heart beat half a beat faster when he heard her shoes on the gravel. And he hated that half beat because it betrayed him. He noticed that whenever he heard her laugh with Zoe in the yard, thin and soft like a thread, he heard it from 100 paces away, as if his ears had tuned themselves just to catch that one sound. Among all the hammers and saws and voices, he noticed that every night on the cot in the shed, he could still smell lavender from the towel she had lent him weeks before. That he hadn't washed it, that he knew he should, but he didn't. He hated this feeling, hated it to the bone, because it made him weak, and weakness in his old world meant death, meant a knife from the person you trusted most. He had been weak once, with his former friend, and he had nearly died for it. He had sworn never to be weak again. Yet every noon when Lena placed the wax paper sandwich beside him and sat quietly on the wood pile, looking out at the lot taking shape, he knew he was losing. Not a battle, something larger than a battle, something he had no weapon to fight, and what scared him most was that he wasn't sure he wanted to fight it anymore. The foundation of the first house was poured in the third week. Mixed concrete from bags Home Depot had given away. Sand and gravel hauled by Danny and Floyd's pickup from the riverbank 8 miles out. The wooden frame went up in the 4th week. 4 walls standing, no roof yet, but upright, on land that a month ago was nothing but trash and broken needles. The people of Millfield had started looking at that lot differently, no longer as a place to avoid, but as a place where they put their hopes. That morning, Marcus was showing Danny how to set the crossbeam at the right load, bearing distance, when the sound of a large engine rolled in from the far end of the street. A glossy black SUV turned onto the dusty road, the kind of vehicle Millfield never saw, unless someone was lost or coming to take something. It stopped directly in front of the site. The rear door opened. A man stepped out, 55 years old. Silver hair slicked back, light blue shirt, sharp khaki pants, brown leather shoes polished to a shine. A heavy gold watch on his wrist. His whole body carried a scent Marcus recognized immediately. He had lived among it his entire life. The smell of money. The front door opened. Another man stepped out, younger, gray suit, leather briefcase. Thin, framed glasses, a lawyer. The silver-haired man didn't look at anyone in the community. He looked at the land, at the rising frame, at the neatly stacked materials, and he smiled, the way a man smiles when he opens a gift and finds exactly what he wanted. The lawyer opened his briefcase, pulled out a stack of papers, walked over to Marcus, recognizing by instinct who was in charge here. Marcus didn't take them. The silver-haired man spoke up, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My name is Neil Pryor. I own this land. These are legal ownership documents acquired through a tax lien sale in Will County. You are trespassing on private property. If you don't clear out within 7 days, I will call the sheriff." Everyone stopped working. Miss Me set her lemonade jug down. Ray let go of his hoe. The young guys looked at each other, then down at the ground. Danny tightened his grip on the hammer. Jaw locked, not knowing who to hit. A month of built-up hope, gone in 30 seconds. Inside Marcus, 2 selves crashed against each other. The old self wanted to step forward, grab the collar of that light blue shirt, drag Pryor into the dark behind the shed, and whisper the things he used to whisper to people who owed him money, the things that made the hardest men go pale and sign whatever papers he put in front of them. Anger surged from his gut to his chest to his throat, hot, familiar, dangerously comforting, because violence is always comforting when you're good at it. But just as he was about to move, he heard the scrape of chalk on concrete. He turned. Zoe was sitting at the corner of the lot, 20 steps away, drawing a flower with colored chalk, completely absorbed, unaware of ownership papers, unaware of tax lien sales, unaware of the man in the shiny car, drawing a red flower, her favorite color. On concrete Marcus had poured by hand for her. He looked at Zoe, and the anger stopped. It didn't disappear. It stayed, but he swallowed it back down, his throat burning as he did. He turned to Pryor, eyes cold. Voice even, "You have your papers, that's fine, but you won't call the sheriff today, you'll wait." Pryor raised an eyebrow. "Wait for what exactly? Until we check whether your papers are clean." Pryor laughed, the laugh of a man who thinks poor people don't know the law. "And how exactly do you plan to hire a lawyer with broken bricks?" At that moment, a woman's voice cut in from the sidewalk, clear and sharp as a scalpel, "With me." She crossed the street from the store front opposite, where she ran a small law office. The sign nothing more than handwritten cardboard taped to the glass. 34 years old, brown hair cut blunt at the chin, gray eyes sharp as a hawk's, black blazer over jeans and flat shoes. Slender, but carrying an energy that made people step aside as she passed. Her name was Paula. She had been an associate at one of the biggest law firms in downtown Chicago, the kind with its name on a 40-story building. She quit 3 years ago, because she got sick of defending wealthy people who did terrible things and paid her to help them walk free. She moved back to Millfield, where she grew up, opened a one-person office in an old storefront, rent equal to a week of coffee in Chicago. She helped poor people for free or for next to nothing. Paula walked up, didn't look at Pryor, looked straight at his lawyer. She told him she knew about the tax lien sale. She knew Pryor had bought the tax debt from the county the previous year. And she knew the purchase price was below the legal minimum, which only happens when someone at the county office deliberately drives the price down for a buyer. She said that was fraud under Illinois property law, that she already had copies of the transaction records, and that Pryor was very welcome to call the sheriff, because she would file an injunction at the county court that same afternoon to block enforcement of his ownership and request a full fraud investigation. And she would love to see how his records looked once a court opened them to the light. Silence. Pryor's lawyer looked at Paula. Then at his client. His confidence had curdled into irritation. Pryor stopped smiling, looked at Paula, at Marcus, at the gathered community, then said crisply, 7 days. He turned, climbed back into the SUV. His lawyer following, the vehicle sped off, leaving a cloud of dust settling over everyone's faces. Pryor wouldn't give up easily. He had money, better, resourced lawyers than Paula, and county connections. But Paula wasn't the type to quit. She had left a 6-figure salary in Chicago to come back and fight people exactly like Neil Pryor. And she would fight until one side fell. The legal battle had begun, and Marcus knew it wouldn't be easy. But this time, he had chosen to fight with the law instead of blood, and he wasn't sure whether that was easier or harder. Only that it was right, because Zoe was still out there drawing flowers on the concrete, and she didn't need to see Marcus Cole become the Chicago boss the world wanted him to be again. By the end of May, Illinois, weather season kicked in. The TV in the bar at the end of the street warned that a severe storm was forming over western Iowa and moving southeast. Straight line winds over 100 miles per hour, hail, possible tornadoes. Marcus heard the report in the late afternoon, looked up at the sky, shifting from blue to a sick yellow haze, and his stomach dropped, because he knew the unfinished wooden frame on the lot wouldn't survive winds above 70 miles per hour. He and Danny spent the entire afternoon tying ropes, driving anchor stakes, covering materials with tarps, doing everything that could be done with bare hands and cheap leftover cord. But he knew it wasn't enough. He knew it the way sailors know when the horizon disappears. That night, the storm hit Millfield just before 11. Marcus lay in the shed, listening to the wind scream through the gaps in the corrugated walls like a living thing. Hail hammering the roof like thousands of fists. The whole structure shaking so hard he had to grip the cot legs to keep from being thrown. The wind lasted nearly 40 minutes. 40 minutes where every second carried the sound of snapping wood, tearing metal, something large collapsing out on the lot. Then the wind eased, the rain softened, and silence came back. The kind of silence that follows disaster, that weighs more than noise. Marcus stepped out of the shed at first light, walked toward the lot, and stopped at the edge of the sidewalk. The first house frame had completely collapsed. The 4 walls the community had raised over weeks, lying piled like matchsticks knocked over by a careless hand. Shattered lumber everywhere, sheets of metal roofing blown hundreds of feet away, tangled in Miss Me's fence. The concrete foundation buried under muddy water, every tarp gone, cement bags split open and mixed with rain into gray sludge. Everything the Millfield community had built with sweat and hope and belief, destroyed in a single night. People arrived one by one. Miss Me stood at the corner with her hand over her mouth, then cried silently, shoulders shaking, tears running down her face. Ray stared at his old hoe buried under broken wood, then turned and walked back into his house. Without a word, Danny stood in front of the wreckage, eyes red, then punched the side of Floyd's pickup with everything he had. Metal rang in the wet morning air. His knuckles split. Blood ran down his hand, but he didn't look down. The young guys came, looked, shook their heads, and drifted away. with the heavy steps of people who had placed their hope in something for the very first time and watched it fall before their eyes. Lena sat in the small room behind the garage with Zoe in her lap. Mr. Button wedged between them. Her eyes were dry. She had cried too much in her life to have tears left for another collapse, but her hands trembled as she held her daughter. And Zoe looked up and asked in the tiniest voice, "Is our house broken?" Lena didn't answer, just pulled her closer. Buried her face in Zoe's curls. Marcus stood alone in the middle of the lot, rain still drizzling on his face, wind whispering through gaps in the metal, and the feeling hit him, not a memory of his former friend, not the image of the 42nd floor penthouse or the night of the beating, but the feeling itself. The feeling of building something and watching it collapse, of standing in the ruins of what you poured yourself into, of the universe telling you you're not allowed to have anything good, that you were born to destroy. Not to build, he wanted to leave, truly to turn his back, walk out of Millfield, get back to Chicago, find his former friend, take back everything with blood, return to the darkness where he belonged, because at least there he knew the rules. He turned and walked 1 step, 2 steps, 3, the 4th never came, because behind him were small footsteps, splashing in puddles, the slap of oversized sneakers on wet ground. Then a small hand closed around 2 of his fingers. Warm, small, wet from the rain. Zoe didn't speak at first. She just held his hand, standing there in her soaked red coat. Curls plastered to her forehead, face smeared with mud. Mr. Button tucked under her arm and just as wet. Holding on, like gripping tight enough would keep him from leaving. Then she looked up, with brown eyes that weren't afraid. Eyes that a collapsed dream couldn't touch. "We can build it again, right?" Marcus stopped. He looked down at a 4-year-old standing in the rain. Muddy, faced, holding his hand, clutching a soaked teddy bear, asking if they could rebuild in a voice that never once doubted the answer would be yes. He got down on one knee, into cold, wet ground, bringing himself to her level, rain on both their faces, over his scars, over her muddy cheeks. He looked into her eyes, and he saw something he had lost a long time ago. Maybe the day his grandfather collapsed at the saw table in Brooklyn. Something the streets and the underworld had killed in him piece by piece, until he believed it no longer existed. The belief that destruction isn't the end. "Yes, little one," he said, "we'll rebuild." He stood, still holding Zoe's hand, turned back toward the lot and called out, "Danny, Floyd, Miss Me, Ray," each name, low and steady, not loud but carrying across the wet morning like a bell. They turned back, one by one, slowly, but they turned back. This time, Marcus built differently, deeper foundations, reinforced concrete instead of hand, mixed. A lower frame to cut wind resistance, a pitched roof on both sides instead of flat, steel anchors bolted straight through the foundation. Every technique he knew from building $1,000,000 towers, now used for a small 2-bedroom house in a poor town. And his mind running at full capacity, calculating, redrawing plans on cardboard, wasn't working to destroy or seize or crush enemies. It was working to build, and Marcus felt something for the first time, that maybe this was what that mind had always been meant to do. He just used it wrong his whole life. A few weeks after the storm, the lot had transformed. New foundation. 3 times stronger. Frame rebuilt with a wind-resistant design. Cross beams bolted through the foundation. A pitched roof at exactly the right angle, so the wind would slide over it instead of slamming it head on. The community came back in bigger numbers than before the storm, because people respect someone who gets knocked down and stands back up more than someone who has never fallen. Danny became Marcus's right hand on the site, quiet but steady, skilled hands, sharp eye. He could judge a beam's load just by looking at it. That morning, Marcus was cutting planks for a door frame when the heavy cough of an old engine came from the far end of the street. A battered dark blue pickup pulled up, windshield cracked diagonally, wheezing as it stopped. The door opened, and a man stepped out, much thinner than the last time Marcus had seen him, beard overgrown, dark hoodie pulled low. And when he turned his face, Marcus saw a fresh scar running from below the left ear down to the collarbone. Dark red and not fully healed, the mark of a blade or broken glass. His name was Jonas, 30, 3 years old. The most loyal and last remaining man of Marcus's organization. The only one, on the night of the ambush, who chose Marcus's side. And nearly died for it. Jonas stopped mid-step when he saw Marcus. His eyes went red, not from anger. From something deeper, something men in their world never named. He stood there for a few seconds, taking in Marcus holding a saw in a sweat-soaked t-shirt. Standing in dust and lumber, "I've been looking for you for 3 months, he said hoarsely. Marcus set the saw down. Looked at Jonas and saw those 3 months written all over him. 10 kilos lost, hollow eyes, that neck scar. A slight hitch on his right side like his ribs, hadn't fully healed. 3 months dodging people sent to find him. 3 months searching through networks that were now controlled by someone else. 3 months living like prey. Without giving up, Marcus nodded toward the shed. They went inside, hot and dim. Smell of motor oil and sawdust. Light slipping through gaps in the metal walls, in golden strips across the concrete floor. Jonas didn't sit. He leaned against the wall, habit of a man who always needed to know where the exit was. Then he told Marcus everything. His former friend, let's call him Warren, had seized the entire organization immediately after Marcus went down. Announced to everyone that Marcus was dead. Staged a fake funeral to kill any doubt. But Warren wasn't Marcus. He had cruelty without vision, ambition without discipline. In 3 months, he lost more than half the major partnerships. Because nobody trusted him, revenue dropped 40%. 2 warehouses were raided by federal agents because Warren didn't understand the security systems Marcus had built. To save himself, Warren had sold his soul to a Russian crime boss named Viktor Koval, who had always wanted to swallow Marcus's organization, but never dared while Marcus was in charge. Now Warren had turned everything Marcus built into a puppet on foreign strings, moving contraband through the port, laundering dirty money through the very restaurant chain Marcus had created. Many former members were angry, but afraid, because Warren crushed any sign of resistance with more cruelty than Marcus had ever used. Not because he was stronger, but because he was more afraid, and a frightened ruler is always crueler than a confident one. Jonas paused, then told Marcus the most important part. A shell company Marcus had quietly formed 5 years earlier. Never appeared in any organizational records. Known only to Marcus and the lawyer who created it. Still existed. Still held significant assets. Rental properties across 3 states and offshore accounts. Marcus had money. He had information. He had Jonas. And he had more than a dozen former members waiting for a signal. He could get into that old pickup right now, drive back to Chicago, and take everything back. Jonas looked at him, waiting, the gaze of a loyal man ready for the order. Marcus felt the old darkness stir in his chest. The old rage, the old instinct, the boss in him wanted to nod, walk out the door, reclaim the throne. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned and looked through the narrow gap between the shed's metal walls. Outside, June sunlight washed over the construction site. Danny was showing a few young guys how to frame a wall. Calm, focused, purposeful, like a man who had finally found a reason to get up every morning. Lena was handing out water from a large jug, smiling as she said something to Miss Me, sunlight catching in her ponytail, turning it the color of honey. And Zoe was sitting at the edge of the concrete, drawing her red flowers with chalk, Mr. Button beside her. Her loyal little guard. Marcus took all of it in through that thin strip of light, then turned back to Jonas. "It's not time yet," he said, low, steady, no hesitation. "I have something I need to finish first." Jonas stared at him, something flickering across his face that he almost never showed. Confusion. The Marcus Cole Jonas had followed for 12 years would have climbed into that truck immediately. Jaw tight, eyes cold, hand on the weapon, and driven straight back to let blood flow. The Marcus Cole standing here now was looking through a gap in a metal wall at a 4-year-old drawing flowers on concrete and saying it wasn't time. Jonas was silent for a few seconds, then nodded slowly, because loyalty doesn't mean understanding. It means following even when you don't. I'll wait. Jonas said, whatever you need, I'm here. The news that Marcus was still alive took about 2 weeks to travel from Millfield back to Chicago. The streets have ears, bars have mouths, and in the underworld, no secret stays buried forever. Someone at the scrapyard had told someone at a dive bar that there was a scarred man bargaining for construction materials like a boss. And the story jumped from mouth to mouth until it reached someone who answered to Warren. Warren wasn't stupid. He just wasn't as good as Marcus, and when he heard Marcus was alive, the fear of a man sitting in the wrong chair snapped awake. He sent 2 men to Millfield, not the smart kind, just big enough and loyal enough to follow orders without asking why. A black SUV parked at the head of the street on the 3rd afternoon, right in front of Dollar General. The 2 men who stepped out looked as out of place as sharks in a goldfish bowl, black leather jackets in the Illinois summer, sunglasses, thick necks, the kind of men any small town recognizes immediately as not from here. They went into the bar asking about a tall, scarred man who had shown up a few months back. Then the convenience store, same question. Marcus spotted the SUV from the construction site around 4 in the afternoon. He was measuring between beams when his eyes swept up the street by habit and caught it. Silent, tinted windows. Engine off, everything in Marcus's body shifted in a tenth of a second. Back straightened, shoulders dropped. Jaw tightened, every sense snapping to full alert, like a switch had been flipped, and the beast that had been sleeping inside him opened its eyes. He said nothing to anyone on site, just set the measuring tape down and walked to the shed to find Jonas. Black SUV, head of the street, 2 men. Jonas didn't need more, he nodded, pulled a folding knife from his back pocket, checked the blade, and headed to the other side of town to watch from a different angle. That night, Marcus didn't sleep in the shed. He took the hunting knife from Floyd's shop drawer, slid it into the back of his belt, and started patrolling. He moved through Millfield's darkness like a ghost, along rusted fences, through the backyards of empty houses. Circling the room where Lena and Zoe slept, eyes sweeping every shadow, every blind corner, his legs remembered how to move without sound on hard ground. How to place the heel first, then lower the toes. How to melt into darkness like it was a coat he'd worn all his life. The old world didn't need an invitation. It found him and fit itself around him perfectly. He told Jonas to set watch at both ends of the street, track the SUV where it went, who drove it, whether it came back. Jonas did it without questions, sleeping in the old pickup at the edge of town. The 2 of them trading shifts through the night like soldiers guarding a small fortress. Lena sensed the change before she understood it. Marcus had grown suddenly quieter, not the comfortable quiet of lunchtime on the lumber piles, but a frozen quiet. The silence of someone listening to something nobody else could hear. Every time he stepped outside, his eyes scanned the street before his foot touched the sidewalk. His shoulder always angled to keep his back to the wall. His body always ready to spring or strike. She watched the way he held the hammer, not to build, but to be ready to use it for something else. And she saw his eyes when the 2 strangers from the black car passed the site. He didn't look at them with worry. He looked at them with cold calculation, like a man counting a predator's steps, to know exactly when to move. That wasn't the look of a builder. It was the look of something else entirely, and it chilled her, because she realized she had been living beside this person for months, without fully knowing what it was. One night, after Zoe fell asleep holding Mr. Button, Lena stepped outside. The sky black, no moon, only a distant street light at the end of the alley. The shed was empty. She looked around the yard, and her heart quickened. Marcus stood in the shadows at the corner of the building, back against the brick wall, nearly invisible, except for the faint glint of his eyes, his right hand gripping the knife at his back. Thumb on the fold, ready. He didn't look at her. He watched the street. "Who are you, Marcus?" She asked it softly. The question she had been carrying for months. He turned to her in the dark. She couldn't see his face clearly. But she saw his eyes, and now they were on her, not the street. He was silent for a few seconds, then spoke, low and slow, choosing every word like a man walking through a minefield. "I lived in a world you shouldn't know about," he said. "That world is looking for me. Someone wants me dead, and they've come here." Lena drew in a sharp breath. The two men in the black car. Yes, they're just the first ones. The real danger is the man behind them. Silence. "Crickets, a light wind through the alley. I need you to be ready," he said. "If things go bad, you take Zoe and you leave right away." His voice was steady, but beneath it, something she recognized. Fear, not for himself, for her, and for Zoe. And somehow that fear in a man standing in the dark with a knife and killer's eyes was more frightening than any threat she had heard. Lena trembled, not from the night air. Illinois summer nights are not cold, but because the truth was standing right in front of her. Holding a knife, saying someone wanted to kill him. She shook, but she didn't step back. She looked straight at him. Into the darkness, where his eyes met hers. Her voice was shaking, but every word was clear. "I've been running my whole life," she said. "From bills, from landlords, from empty apartments, from loneliness, and this time I'm not running." Eyes locked in the dark. Neither of them moved. The air between them felt almost solid, and something cracked open inside Marcus's chest. Not pain, he knew pain, had lived inside it his whole life. This wasn't pain. This was something warm and soft, and more terrifying than a bullet, because a bullet could only kill his body, but this could tear down every wall he had ever built inside himself. For 36 years, 3 days after that night in the dark, the black SUV came back to Millfield. But this time, it didn't sit quietly at the end of the street. It drove straight into the construction site. At 10 in the morning, while the entire community was working in broad daylight, that brazenness told Marcus everything he needed to know. Warren had run out of patience. The two men got out, faces cold, shoulders wide, footsteps heavy with purpose. Not here to ask questions, here to make trouble. The first man walked straight up to Danny, who was framing a wall, and shoved him hard in the chest with both hands. Danny flew backward, slammed into a pile of sand. Dust exploded around him. The second man walked past Lena, who was pouring water into cups from a large container on a wooden table, didn't even look at her, and kicked the container over with the toe of his boot. Water spilled everywhere, soaking Lena's shoes, soaking Zoe, who was standing right beside her mother. Zoe, startled, eyes wide, clutched Mr. Button tight. The first man stopped in the middle of the site, looked around with contempt, then spoke loudly, loud enough for every single person to hear. Warren Pace sends his regards. He smiled, the smile of someone with power standing behind him, who believed he was untouchable. "Tell Cole to get out of here before Warren has to come himself. Next time, it won't just be a water container." Everyone froze. Miss Me put the lemonade jug down, hands shaking. Ray dropped his hammer and took 2 steps back. The young guys looked at each other, unsure. Floyd stood by his pickup, wrench in hand, jaw locked, ready but waiting. Danny scrambled up from the sand, eyes red, fists white, his whole body shaking with rage, and something deeper, something Afghanistan had left inside him, just below the surface. Waiting for a spark, he stepped forward, ready to fight. Marcus raised his left hand, palm facing Danny. Small, light, but carrying the weight of absolute command. Danny stopped not from fear, but because after weeks beside Marcus, he had learned, when Marcus raised that hand, there was always a reason. Marcus set the saw down on the ground, slowly, deliberately. He straightened, and everyone on that site saw something they had never seen before. He changed, not gradually, in an instant, like someone turning a page. His back straightened like steel. Shoulders opened, his steps slow and precise. Every footfall placed like it was measured. His eyes, so cold the air around him seemed to drop a few degrees. The quiet builder in the sweat-soaked vanished. The man walking out of the crowd was Marcus Cole. the Chicago boss who had controlled half the city's underworld since the age of 25. And with every step he took toward the two men, the weight of those steps grew. Not because he was larger, but because of what radiated from him, a lethal, icy calm that can't be faked. Something earned only by surviving long enough in the dark. He stopped 3 steps away from them, close enough for them to see his eyes clearly. And he spoke low, slow, each word sharp and clean. "You have 30 seconds to get back in your car." The first man opened his mouth. Marcus continued, not raising his voice, not shouting, just speaking, evenly, coldly. "Go back and tell Warren Pace that Marcus Cole still remembers every face in the organization. Remembers names, remembers addresses, remembers the names of every wife, every child, and I'm coming for him." He tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on the first man. "When I'm ready, not when he wants." Silence. The two men stared at Marcus, and Marcus saw the exact moment recognition arrived in their eyes. They looked at his face, and saw something they had only ever heard about in whispered stories, something Warren had tried to replace with cruelty, and never could. The blood drained from the first man's face, slowly, like water draining down a sink. The second man took a step back, a step he probably didn't even realize he was taking. No more words. The two men turned, walked quickly back to the SUV, not running, but not walking normally either, the way people move when they're trying to keep their dignity, while their feet want to run. They got in and sped off, tires screaming on the asphalt, leaving black skid marks and the smell of burned rubber. The site went completely silent. Floyd stood by his truck, wrench still in hand, looking at Marcus with new eyes. Not just suspicion anymore, something more complex, like a man who just realized the dog he'd been feeding was a wolf. Miss Me covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide. Danny looked at Marcus, and in the former soldier's eyes was something no one in Millfield had ever seen in Danny Kent before. Real, deep respect, mixed with careful awe. The kind a soldier gives a battlefield commander. Lena held Zoe close. Zoe's face buried in her mother's chest. Mr. Button trapped between them. Lena's eyes were on Marcus, and her face held an expression that couldn't be fully read, because it held too many things at once. Gratitude, because he had just protected every person standing there. Fear, because of what she had just seen in his eyes. In his voice, in the way his entire body had transformed in a single second. And a third thing, the deepest thing. The one she didn't dare name, because naming it would make it real, and she wasn't ready for it to be real yet. Marcus turned back to the group, and when he did, his face had returned to the familiar look of the quiet builder, as if the Chicago boss had never appeared, but his hands were shaking, adrenaline still racing. He hid the tremor by picking up the saw again. "I'm sorry, everyone," he said, his voice ordinary, almost gentle, old business. "It won't happen again." But everyone looked at him. And everyone knew, even if nobody said it out loud, the man holding that saw wasn't just a builder. And quiet little Millfield had just brushed the edge of something far larger, darker, and more dangerous than anything the town had ever known. Despite the black car and Warren's threat, the Millfield community kept building, not because they weren't afraid. They were, but because something stronger than fear had taken root on that patch of land, something they didn't want to lose again. And 4 weeks after the two men sped away, the first house was finished, small, compact, 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into the living room, a pitched roof, and a wooden front porch, wide enough for 2 chairs and a flower pot. Painted blue, Zoe had chosen the color. She stood in front of the paint samples, her small finger pointing to a square of sky blue. "This one, Uncle Marcus, the color of the sky, so Mom will be happy, because Mom looks at the sky a lot." On the final day, everyone painted together. Danny painted the exterior walls, Floyd painted the porch, Miss Me painted the window frames that Marcus had carved by hand from recycled wood. The young guys painted the eaves, and Zoe painted the front steps with a small brush Marcus had trimmed to fit her hand. Mr. Button sat on a paint can, standing guard. When the final coat dried under the afternoon sun, the whole community stepped back and looked. The little blue house, standing in the place that had been trash and needles just months before. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then Miss Me clapped, then Ray, then everyone. Someone painted in white on a board at the edge of the lot, Zoe's ground. The first night in the new house, Lena led Zoe into the child's bedroom, small, just big enough for a single bed and a plastic dresser. A window facing the yard, curtains sewn by Miss Me from old fabric, and a real bed, a real mattress. Not the concrete floor behind the garage, not a bus seat, not the floor of an apartment where Zoe had curled under a thin blanket for 2 years. A real bed in her own room, in a house built for them. Zoe placed Mr. Button on the pillow, pulled the blanket up to the bear's chin, and said, "Sleep well, Mr. Button. We have a home now." Then she lay down, closed her eyes, and fell asleep within minutes. Like she had been waiting her whole life for this sleep, Lena stood in the doorway, watching the small nightlight on. Zoe's face calm, Mr. Button under the blanket, the blue wall the whole town had painted together. Tears ran silently down Lena's cheeks. Not from sadness. She'd cried from sadness too many times to mistake it. These were different. The tears of a woman watching her daughter sleep in a real bed, in her own room, in a real house, for the very first time, without having to fear a knock the next morning. She stood there until the tears dried, wiped her face, and stepped out onto the front porch. Marcus was already there, sitting on the wooden step he had built himself, back against the porch post, eyes on the sky. The Millfield night sky was full of stars. Far from the glow of Chicago, the Milky Way stretched overhead like a brushstroke across black canvas. Lena sat beside him, closer than before, her shoulder almost touching his. Silence. Then Lena talked about Travis. Not the painful details she had shared at the bus station, but softer things, things she had kept to herself for 2 years. Because there had been nobody to tell, their wedding at Chicago City Hall with only 2 witnesses, Lena in a white dress from a thrift store that cost $12, Travis in the only new shirt he owned, their honeymoon one night at a motel off the highway, because that was all they could afford. And Travis bought her a plastic rose from a gas station, because real flowers were too expensive. Travis came home every night smelling of cement and sweat, his clothes white with dust, but he never, not once, forgot to lift Zoe and kiss her before showering. No matter how tired he was, Lena smiled in the dark as she spoke, and Marcus listened, really listened, because he understood she was giving him something more precious than any secret from the underworld. She was showing him her softest place, the part she had kept behind calm armor for 2 years. Then she fell quiet, and Marcus understood it was his turn, not because she asked, she never pushed, but because of the blue house behind him, because of the child sleeping inside, because of her hand near his on that wooden step. All of it asked him to stop hiding. He took a long breath, and he told her, not a warning like the night in the dark. This was a confession. He was Marcus Cole, head of a criminal organization in Chicago. He had controlled real estate, ports, and laundered money through restaurant chains. He had ordered people hurt. He had built an empire on the suffering of people who would never know his face. He told it without making excuses, without justifying, without saying he had no choice, the truth, bare and ugly. Each sentence like cutting into his own chest with a knife, in front of her. Lena's whole body trembled, and every instinct screamed at her, stand up, go inside, lock the door, hold Zoe, run, but she looked at his hands. The hands that had sewn Mr. Button, carved window frames, built the house her daughter was sleeping in. She saw his eyes fixed on the porch step, not looking at her, like a man kneeling before his own conscience. Waiting for judgment without daring to look up, she saw the remorse he wasn't speaking, written in the cords of his neck, in the way his jaw clenched like he was biting back a sob. "Will you go back to that world?" Lena asked. Her voice quiet. "I have to," Marcus said, still looking down, not for money, not for power, But if I don't stop Warren, he will come here. He'll come for you and Zoe, and I won't allow that." Silence, the Milky Way above, crickets below, Zoe murmuring softly in her sleep inside, maybe dreaming of Mr. Button. Then Lena did something no script could have predicted. She placed her left hand over Marcus's right hand on the porch step. Her hand was small, thin, calloused from dishes and mops, nails cut short, unpolished. His was large. Thick, scarred, knuckles swollen from fights and from building, 2 hands from completely different worlds, with no reason to rest together on the wooden step of a blue house in a poor town outside Chicago, but they did. Her fingers slid between his and he held back, gently, like he was afraid squeezing too hard might break something fragile they had just barely touched. "Then go," Lena said, her voice shaking, but every word clear, "and come back." Marcus leaned forward. His forehead rested against hers, no kiss, just foreheads touching, sharing a small pocket of warm air between their faces. The lavender scent of her skin, the smell of new wood from the porch, the warm, damp Illinois summer night. All of it mixed in the inches between his face and hers, inches they both knew could be closed, but weren't. Not yet, because this moment was enough, more than either of them had ever had, and some things are too precious to rush. An unspoken promise hung between them in the dark, beneath the Milky Way, on the wooden step of the blue house. A promise weighting more than any oath Marcus had ever sworn in his life, because this time he wasn't promising with blood or guns, but with foreheads touching and shared breath, under a sky full of stars. Marcus left the blue house at 4 in the morning. The sky still black, stars not yet faded. He stood on the porch and looked one last time at Zoe's bedroom window. The nightlight, the soft yellow glow, her sleeping inside with Mr. Button in her arms. He wanted to go in, kiss her forehead, but he was afraid of waking her, afraid of those brown eyes opening, asking where he was going, afraid he wouldn't know how to answer. He turned toward Lena's room, the door slightly open, and in the darkness he saw her. Awake, sitting on the bed, eyes on him through the crack, not speaking, just looking. He nodded. She nodded back. No other words needed, because they had said everything the night before, on the porch. Jonas was waiting in the old pickup at the end of the alley. Engine running, lights off, Marcus got in, the door closed, and the truck pulled away. Millfield shrank in the rearview mirror. The small blue house growing smaller, smaller, until it disappeared around a bend. On the drive back to Chicago, Marcus stayed silent for the first hour. Hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on empty highway at dawn. Trees streaking past like a film on fast, forward. He didn't speak, because inside him, 2 men were wrestling for the last time. The Marcus of Millfield wanting to turn the truck around. The Marcus of Chicago knowing that if he didn't go now, Warren would come to Millfield. And next time it wouldn't just be a kicked-over water container. The first 3 days in Chicago, Marcus operated from a cheap hotel in Cicero. The kind that took cash and didn't ask names. Thin walls, sheets smelling of bleach, the neighbor's television coming through the wall. He activated the shell company, contacted the attorney who had set it up 5 years earlier, moved money through 3 layers of intermediaries into a clean operating account. Enough to hire a 6-man security team, former military, professional, few questions. Enough to rent a secure meeting room in a downtown hotel as a temporary base. Enough to re-enter the game without touching a single dollar of dirty money. Jonas quietly contacted former members who were still loyal. One by one, individual meetings, coffee shops, parking lots, parks, never 2 at the same time. 12 men came back. Not because Marcus promised money or power, but because under Warren they had been treated like errand boys. And they missed the days when the organization was its own, not a puppet for someone else. Marcus gathered evidence. Shipping records, fake invoices, encrypted messages between Warren and Victor Koval, copied by a former tech specialist who had been fired before he could be silenced. Paula connected Marcus with a federal criminal attorney in Chicago, the kind who had handled RICO cases. who knew exactly what the FBI needed in exchange for a cooperation agreement. Marcus sat across from 2 FBI agents and a federal prosecutor. A 6-hour session, and he told them everything, from the beginning to the end: the organizational structure, the transport routes, the laundering systems, Warren's role, the Russian connection. He signed the cooperation agreement, provided all evidence, agreed to testify in exchange for immunity, on the condition that all illegal activity be fully shut down, and the organization converted into a legitimate business within 1 year. When he signed his name on the final line, Marcus felt something strange. Not relief, not fear. The sensation of a man who had just burned the last bridge back to his past, and knew there was no road back. Every night in the Cicero hotel room, Marcus called Lena on a burner phone. Lena's voice on the other end sounded tired, but warm. She asked if he had eaten. He said yes, even when he hadn't, and they both knew he was lying. But neither called it out. Then Lena would put the phone on speaker, and Zoe's voice would ring out, bright and clear, telling him a yellow butterfly had landed on the porch railing for a whole hour and wouldn't fly away. Telling him she drew a picture for Daddy Marcus, a blue house with 2 big people and 1 small person standing on the porch. Telling him that Mr. Button had gotten a brand new bow, made by Mom from an old ribbon. And now Mr. Button looked very handsome. Marcus lay on the cheap hotel bed, listening to her through the phone, and that voice was the only thread keeping him from falling completely back into the dark. Because during the days he moved through his old world, talking to agents, meeting former members, walking streets he once owned, the old darkness pulled at him every second, whispering that he could take everything back. Without the FBI, without the law, with blood and iron like before. But every night Zoe's voice pulled him back, and he chose the light for 1 more day. On the 12th day, Marcus called a meeting in the very penthouse on the 42nd floor, where he had once stood above the city believing he owned everything. He returned not to sit on the throne, but to burn it down. 12 former members stood in the wide living room. Faces serious, silent, waiting. Marcus stood in the center, wearing a new black suit, not expensive, but one that fit well, back straight, shoulders open, eyes cold as steel yet calm, the calm that only comes from knowing you're doing the right thing. Warren walked into the penthouse at 8 that evening, confident, expensive gray suit, 2 bodyguards. He thought Marcus was ready to negotiate a split, take some money and disappear, but when the elevator doors opened, the smile died on Warren's face. 12 men lining the room, faces cold, eyes fixed on him with the look of people who had chosen a side. On the large TV mounted on the wall, evidence of betrayal scrolled page by page, numbers, messages. Fake invoices, nothing missing, nothing hidden. Warren went pale. He looked around for an exit, but his bodyguards had already been stopped at the door. He began to plead, voice shaking, sweat on his forehead. Marcus, listen to me. I did it for the organization you left. Everyone thought you were dead. I had to hold it together. Marcus didn't answer. Warren shifted to threats, voice rising. You think you can touch me? Victor will kill everyone. You're poking a hornet's nest. Marcus still didn't answer. He stepped close to Warren, close enough to smell the expensive cologne, and the fear under it. His voice was low. Slow meant only for the 2 of them. I treated you like a brother. 12 years. That was the biggest mistake of my life. Warren opened his mouth. Marcus continued, but I'm not going to kill you. Not because you deserve to live, but because of 4. Your old girl taught me that these hands can build instead of destroy. Warren looked into Marcus's eyes and understood for the first time. Marcus hadn't come to take back the throne. He had come to burn it down. The penthouse doors opened. FBI agents flooded in. Dark blue jackets, gold letters. Guns drawn, FBI. Get down. Hands on your head. Warren was handcuffed on the penthouse floor, the floor he had once walked as a king. All connected criminal contacts were arrested in coordinated raids the same night. at 4 other locations across Chicago. Victor Koval was taken down in a larger multi-state operation. Marcus stood at the window of the 42nd floor and looked down at Chicago one last time, the city spread beneath him, lights glittering over the lake, highways glowing like veins. He remembered the first time he stood at this window, at 25, thinking he owned everything. He owned nothing, he never had, only darkness. He turned his back, walked out of the penthouse, stepped into the elevator. And when the doors closed, he didn't look back. Marcus drove south on the highway, window rolled down. The July air warm and humid against his face, carrying the smell of dry grass and sun, heated earth. He drove alone, because Jonas stayed in Chicago to handle the paperwork. And the solitude of that 1-hour stretch was exactly what he needed. Space to breathe, to let the Chicago boss slowly leave his body through the open window, like smoke clearing. On the passenger seat sat a cardboard box he had brought from the hotel room. No guns inside, no cash. No criminal evidence, just a stack of handwritten plans he had sketched over sleepless nights, bought from a stationery shop near the hotel. The designs laid out a plan to turn everything into a nationwide program, building affordable homes for communities that had been forgotten. Everything calculated with the same strategic mind that once built an underground empire. But this time, every number pointed toward the light. Community, build models, recycled materials, partnerships with local governments, federal grants for social housing, vocational training and construction jobs for unemployed youth and veterans like Danny. It was all there in that cardboard box. On the passenger seat of an old pickup, driving toward a small blue house, the way other men drive home with a birthday gift for their child. He pulled up in front of the blue house just before 4 in the afternoon. The late sun stretched the house's shadow long across the ground, the blue paint glowing, the wooden porch solid and calm. He turned off the engine and sat there for a few seconds, looking at the house, and felt something strange in his chest, something it took him a moment to recognize. The feeling of home, a feeling he hadn't known since the day the Brooklyn carpentry shop was taken away. Then the curtain in Zoe's bedroom window flew aside. A small face appeared, big brown eyes widening to twice their size. A shout pierced through the glass. "Daddy Marcus is home! Mom, Daddy Marcus is home!" The front door burst open, and Zoe ran out on tiny legs, moving so fast she nearly tripped on the step. Curls flying, Mr. button tucked under her arm. She threw herself straight into Marcus's legs as he stepped out of the truck, arms around his knees, face buried in his pant leg. "Daddy, you're home." Marcus froze, his hands lifted and hovered at his sides. Like the first time Zoe fell asleep on his lap, Daddy, not Uncle, not Mr. Daddy, his throat locked. A hot, solid knot he couldn't swallow past, his eyes burned. He placed his right hand on Zoe's curly head, felt the soft strands winding around his fingers, felt her gripping his legs so tight he couldn't have moved even if he wanted to. He turned his face away, staring at the rusted fence across the street, at anything that wasn't a human face. Because he didn't want anyone to see Marcus Cole crying because of 4. Your old girl called him Daddy. But he cried. Tears came without permission, rolling down his cheeks over old scars, and he let them fall. Because he had no strength left to fight it. Because that one word, Daddy, had shattered the last wall inside him, the one that everything else had failed to break. Lena stood in the doorway of the blue house, the late sun behind her, a halo of light around her ponytail. She wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans, barefoot on the porch boards, and she watched Marcus standing in the yard, holding her daughter with wet eyes, smiling, a smile without weight, without worry, holding only the simple, pure joy of someone seeing the person they waited for come home. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That smile said everything. That night, after Zoe showed Marcus the drawing she had made for him. The blue house, 3 stick figures on the porch, a tiny teddy bear in the corner, after she told him, without stopping, about the yellow butterfly and Mr. Button's new beau, and Uncle Danny teaching her to count to 20 after she hugged Mr. Button and fell asleep within minutes. Too happy and too tired to stay awake another second, Marcus and Lena sat on the porch, the familiar wooden steps, the familiar porch post, the familiar sky full of stars, but something was different now. Marcus told Lena everything that happened in Chicago, leaving nothing out, softening nothing, the FBI, the cooperation agreement, the night in the penthouse, Warren in handcuffs on the floor, Victor Koval taken down, and he told her he had chosen to turn the old empire into something else, that he would never return to the underworld, never. He said that word, never, with the voice of a man who had watched the bridge burn to ash. Lena listened, didn't interrupt, didn't ask for more. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Thank you for coming back. Not, thank you for stopping Warren. Not, thank you for removing the danger. Just thank you for coming back. Nothing more." And Marcus understood. That was all she ever needed from him. A long silence followed, crickets, soft wind over the roof, the yellow porch light. Marcus turned and looked at Lena. The warm light on her face, still thin, the dark circles still there, but lighter now, and those brown eyes bright. Truly bright, the kind of brightness he hadn't seen since the day they met on that bus station bench. He leaned in slowly, very slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted to. She didn't. He kissed her. Slow and trembling, his lips touching hers so lightly it was almost not a kiss but a question, and she answered. By not pulling away, they both trembled, like it was the first time, because in a way it was. Gideon's first time with something real instead of a transaction. Lena's first time with anyone since Travis, and they were both afraid. Afraid that if the kiss grew too strong, the dream would shatter. Afraid that something this fragile couldn't hold the weight of everything they carried. Lips against lips. The scent of lavender, the smell of new wood, the warm, humid Illinois summer night, all of it mixing. In the first real kiss on the steps of the blue house, when Marcus pulled back, his forehead still rested against hers. Their breath sharing the same small space. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly, his voice rough. Lena lifted her hand to his cheek, her warm palm resting against the scar on his cheekbone. "I don't need you to deserve me," she said, calm and clear. "I need you here." And for the first time in 36 years, Marcus Cole felt that he belonged somewhere. Not the 42nd floor penthouse, not the streets of Brooklyn, not the underworld, but the wooden steps of a blue house. In a small, forgotten town in Illinois, beside a thin woman with bright eyes and calloused hands, and a 4-year-old girl sleeping inside, holding a worn teddy bear, stitched back together with thread from a torn jacket, in a Greyhound bus station. On the morning his life began again. A few months later, on a Saturday morning in October, Zoe turned 5 years old. Lena woke at 5 in the morning, moving gently so she wouldn't wake Marcus sleeping on the living room sofa. He had insisted on not sharing a bedroom with her while Zoe was still in the house, saying Zoe needed to know he respected her mother. Lena didn't argue. She understood this was Marcus's way of building something right for the first time in his life. She stood in the small kitchen, mixing chocolate cake batter from a box mix that cost $3.75 at Dollar General. She spread the frosting with a tablespoon because she didn't own a frosting knife, and she wrote Zoe's name on top in blue buttercream. Because blue was the color of the house, she stepped back and looked at it. Crooked, uneven frosting. Letters slightly slanted, but she smiled, because this was the first birthday cake she had ever made for her child. In her own home, on her own kitchen table. And there was nothing more beautiful in the world. Floyd arrived at 8, carrying a pack of balloons from Dollar General, 12 of them bright colors. He sat on the porch blowing them up by mouth, one by one because nobody had a pump. His face going red by the 5th balloon, but he didn't stop, because this was the birthday of his late best friend's daughter. And Floyd Tucker didn't know how to say things gently, but he knew how to blow up balloons until he nearly passed out. Danny arrived at 9, carrying a string of small warm, white lights he had found at a thrift store. He hung them along the porch roof, each nail precise, each bulb evenly spaced, because Danny Kent did everything with a soldier's precision and the care of a man who had finally found a reason to be careful again. Zoe woke at 9:30, ran into the living room, saw the balloons, saw the lights, and her face lit up so brightly the whole room seemed brighter. Wow! Miss Me brought coloring books and a brand new box of 24 crayons. Still sealed, Ray brought a blonde doll from a thrift store, a little worn but clean, pink dress. The young men who had helped build the house brought a wooden block set. None of the gifts cost more than $5. But every single one had been chosen and carried by someone who truly cared. Marcus stood at the corner of the porch, back against the post, glass of lemonade in hand, and he watched. He watched Zoe run across the front yard, the foil crown Lena had made from cardboard sparkling in the sun. He watched Lena smiling with Miss Me in the kitchen through the open window. He watched Floyd on the porch swing, face still red from the balloons. He watched Danny lift a neighborhood kid onto his shoulders to reach a balloon stuck in the tree. The child laughing. Danny laughing too, really laughing, the kind his nightmares had taken from him for years. Marcus watched all of it and saw something he had never had in his entire life, a party, a real birthday party. No hidden agendas, nobody there out of fear, no gifts meant to buy loyalty, no fake smiles, no empty words. Just a crooked cake, balloons slowly losing air, Christmas lights strung on a porch in October, and poor people loving each other honestly, without asking for anything in return. Simple, pure joy, and Marcus realized he had never known this existed. Zoe ran over and grabbed his hand, curls stuck to her sweaty forehead, the paper crown slipping sideways. Panting from running too much. "Daddy Marcus, I have a gift for you." She pulled a folded drawing from behind her back, opened it with both hands, a crayon drawing on white paper, the lines of a 5-year-old, crooked and out of proportion, but clear, rows of colorful houses along a brown road, blue ones, red ones, yellow ones, purple ones, each with windows and chimneys, and in front of them, 2 stick figures holding hands, one big, one small. The big one had a line across the face that Marcus understood was a scar. The small one had wild curly hair and was holding something round and brown, which Marcus understood was Mr. Button. "This is Daddy Marcus and me building houses for everyone," Zoe explained. She pointed to each house one by one. "This one is for Miss Me. This one is for Uncle Danny. This one is for Uncle Floyd. This one is for people who are sad and don't have a home yet." Marcus held the drawing and looked at it for a long time, longer than a child's drawing needed, but he wasn't looking at the lines. He was looking at the world inside it, the world Zoe saw, the world a 5-year-old believed he and she could build together. His eyes filled. "It's beautiful, little one. I'll keep it forever." He folded the drawing carefully, slipped it into the pocket over his heart, and tapped the pocket twice, like he was checking on the most precious thing he owned. His phone buzzed in his pocket. An unfamiliar Chicago number. He answered. A familiar voice. An old business contact from his days in legitimate real estate. "Marcus, I hear you're clean now. I've got a luxury condo project. Lake Michigan views, massive profits you in. With your experience, it's guaranteed money." Marcus looked out at the yard. Zoe was pulling Danny into a game of musical chairs. Danny, 3 times the size of the kids, awkwardly sitting down on a tiny plastic chair when the music stopped. Lena was cutting the cake inside, her laughter drifting out the open window. Floyd on the porch swing, smiling one of his rare smiles, the kind he saved for moments that actually mattered. "Thanks, but I'm not interested." Silence on the other end. "What guaranteed profits? You used to dream of projects like this." "I'm richer than you think," Marcus said. Eyes on Zoe, laughing as Danny collapsed onto the tiny chair. "My assets just aren't measured in dollars." He ended the call, slipped the phone back in his pocket, his hand resting on the pocket where the crayon drawing sat. Then he stepped off the porch, into the yard, and Zoe immediately ran over and pulled him into the circle of musical chairs. "Daddy Marcus has to play. You're the biggest, so you sit on the last chair." Marcus Cole, 41 years old, former Chicago crime boss, sat down on a tiny white plastic chair in the yard of a blue house. In the poor town of Millfield, Illinois, children running around him laughing, Lena turning on music from an old radio on the porch, Miss Me clapping along to the beat. And when the music stopped and Zoe jumped into his lap instead of sitting on the chair, because she had decided Daddy Marcus's lap was also a kind of chair, he held her and laughed, not the cold smile of a boss, not the polite grin of a negotiator, laughter, rising from somewhere deep inside, from a place he had believed had dried up and died a very long time ago. 5 years since that morning on the plastic chairs at the Greyhound bus station. Since the dollar store butter cookie placed on the bruised knuckle of a man who had lost everything. Zoe's Ground became a national model, active in 15 states across the United States, more than 500 families receiving homes, more than 500 roofs built by communities with their own hands for themselves, exactly following the model Marcus had sketched on cardboard. With Zoe's purple princess pencil, inside a rusted metal shed in Millfield, Marcus was invited to speak before the United States Congress about affordable housing. Standing at a podium in a marble, columned chamber with a high ceiling, wearing a simple black suit, speaking in a low, steady voice that held the room silent because every word carried real experience, real pain and real change. Danny Kent, the former 24-year old veteran with PTSD and a record nobody would hire, became the National Operations Director of Zoe's Ground, traveling across 15 states, training communities, and the ghosts of the battlefield were gone from his eyes. Replaced by the gaze of a man who had found a reason to wake up every morning, Paula won the land case in Will County. Neil Pryor was convicted of fraud, and Paula used that victory to build a network of community lawyers serving the poor across 7 counties in Illinois. Floyd Tucker ran the entire mechanical division of the project, his oil guard hands now training dozens of young workers. And when people asked why he stayed with Zoe's Ground, Floyd just said he promised Travis and went back to work. That afternoon, a reporter from a national magazine came to visit the construction site in Millfield, a young woman with a recorder and a notebook. She asked the question everyone always wanted to ask. "Don't you miss your old life, the power, the money, everything you once had?" Marcus looked at her calmly, his eyes no longer cold steel, warmer now, deeper, the eyes of a man who walked through darkness and chose not to stay there. "That man died on a Greyhound bus station chair 5 years ago," he said. "The man standing here was born from a butter cookie and a torn teddy bear." The reporter looked at him for a long moment, nodded and wrote it down, and Marcus knew she didn't fully understand, couldn't fully understand, because some things can only be understood by living through them. The final night of this story, the porch of the Blue House, under a sky full of stars, Millfield, quiet. 5 years have passed, but the wooden steps are still solid, built by Marcus from good wood, with the hands of a carpenter taught by his grandfather Angelo in a Brooklyn wood shop. Marcus sat on those steps, back against the porch post, eyes on the Milky Way. Zoe sat beside him, 9 years old now. Much taller, feet touching the ground instead of dangling, brown curls longer, tied in a ponytail like her mother's. Big brown eyes, sharper and smarter, the eyes of a child raised in love who knows she is loved. She leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder. Naturally familiar, like his shoulder had always been made for her head, Mr. Button sat on her lap. Older and more worn, but still whole, his stuffed arm still bearing the black stitching, from thread pulled from a jacket in a bus station 5 years ago. The stitch still strong, still holding, because when Marcus Cole sews something, it holds. Inside the house, through the open window, Lena rocked their baby son to sleep. The boy was named Travis, After the late husband who fell from the 7th floor of a construction site and never came home, Marcus had suggested the name, telling Lena that the child should carry his father's name. Because without Travis, there would be no Zoe, and without Zoe, there would be no Marcus now, and in that moment, Lena knew with everything inside her that she had chosen the right man. A soft lullaby drifted through the open window, mixing with the crickets. And the gentle wind, the words unclear, the melody warm, Daddy Marcus. Do you remember the first day, at the bus station? Zoe asked. Her 9-year-old voice clear and thoughtful. I remember it perfectly, little one. I was scared of you at first, she said. Your face was covered in blood. I thought you were a zombie. Marcus chuckled softly. But Mom said, when someone is sad, you should help them. So I gave you my cookie. I thought cookies could fix everything back then. And you saved me. Zoe sat up straight, looked at him with the serious brown eyes of a 9-year-old who understood more than her age should allow. No, she said, we saved each other. You gave me a house, I gave you a family. You taught me how to build. I taught you how to laugh. Marcus looked at his daughter. Not his by blood, but by everything else that matters more than blood. And he pulled her into his arms. He listened to Lena's lullaby drifting through the open window. He breathed in the familiar lavender on the night air. He looked out at the street where 5 years ago there had been only trash and broken needles. Now rows of colorful houses stood, just like the crayon drawing Zoe had given him on her 5th birthday. The drawing he still carried in his breast pocket every single day, until its folds were nearly worn through. Miss Me's house, Danny's house, Floyd's house, and other houses. For people who were sad and had no home yet, just like Zoe had said, he thought of the man lying broken on a Greyhound chair 5 years ago. An expensive suit soaked in blood, ribs shattered, soul empty, a man who believed he had lost everything and had no reason left to live. That man is gone. He truly died there on that bus station chair. Died when a tiny hand touched his bruised finger and placed a cheap butter cookie on his knee. And from that death, from that cookie, from that torn teddy bear, someone else was born, the man sitting here on the porch of the blue house, holding his 9-year-old daughter, listening to his wife sing their son to sleep, looking at homes built by a community with their own hands. That man understands that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. That rock bottom isn't the end. It's the beginning, that hands born to destroy can learn to build again, and that the most precious thing in the world isn't a penthouse on the 42nd floor or a $1 million empire, but a small hand holding yours in the dark and never letting go. The story of Marcus Cole, of Lena Holloway, of Zoe and Mr. Button ends here, on the porch of a blue house, under a sky full of stars, in a small town the world nearly forgot. But its lesson doesn't end. That lesson says no one in this world is too broken to be fixed. No one has fallen too far to stand up again. And sometimes the one who saves us isn't some great hero, but just a 4-year-old child offering a cookie and asking, "Are you hurt?"